I spent 10 years keeping North Star running while my brother, Mason, spent 10 months drinking scotch with the board when he stood up to announce he was the new partner. He looked at me with a pitying smile, expecting me to clap. He didn't know I had purchased the controlling interest exactly 40 minutes ago. I didn't raise a glass to his victory. I simply raised my hand and told him to pack his desk. The loading dock at North Star Components Group smelled of ozone, diesel exhaust, and the distinct metallic tang of panic. It was 6 in the morning on a Monday in November, and the wind whipping off Lake Michigan rattled the corrugated steel siding of our shipping bay. I stood in the center of the chaos, holding a tablet that felt heavy in my hand, watching 20,000 pounds of precision-milled aluminum casings sit motionless on the concrete. They were supposed to be on a truck to Detroit 4 hours ago. The foreman, a man named Miller, who had been with us since my father poured the foundation, looked ready to throw his clipboard through a wall. They are claiming the manifest does not match the purchase order. Gabriella, Miller said, his voice tight. The driver refuses to load. He says his dispatcher told him to sit tight until the paperwork clears. If this shipment does not leave by 7, the second shift at the assembly plant in Michigan shuts down. That is a $50,000 an hour penalty. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. In my 14 years at North Star, I had learned that silence was often louder than noise. I walked past Miller, past the idling forklift, and tapped on the window of the semi-truck. The driver, a guy in a faded hoodie, rolled it down reluctantly. "I need to see your dispatch log," I said. He hesitated. "Look, lady, I just drive. Aeroline dispatch said there is a credit hold or something." "There is no credit hold," I said, my voice flat and hard. "We paid Aeroline a retainer of $12,000 last Thursday. I authorized the wire myself. Now, you can sit here and explain to Ford Motor Company why their line stopped, or you can look at this authorization code on my screen. Call your dispatcher and tell them to clear the hold before I call the carrier and have your contract voided for non-performance." The driver looked at me. He saw a woman in a wool coat and sensible boots, 34 years old, with dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. But he also saw someone who knew exactly what the fine print in his contract said. He made the call. 10 minutes later, the pallets were moving. By the time I reached my office on the 4th floor, the crisis was over. I had saved the company $250,000 in potential penalties before most of the executive team had finished their morning coffee. I sat down at my desk, the leather chair sighing under me, and rubbed my temples. This was the job. It was unglamorous, relentless, and invisible. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my brother. "Mason, great weekend. See you at Mom's tonight. Big news." I stared at the screen. Mason did not know about the shipping delay. He did not know about the negotiations I was handling with the union reps for the tool and die shop. Mason was the vice president of strategic development, a title my father had created 3 years ago to give Mason a salary and an office without giving him the keys to anything that mattered, or so I thought. The dinner that night was at my mother's house in Lincoln Park, a sprawling brownstone that smelled of potpourri and old money. Elaine Reed sat at the head of the table, looking elegant and fragile, picking at her salmon. Mason sat to her right, flushed with wine and self-importance. I sat opposite him, nursing a glass of water. "You look tired." "Gabby," Mason said, slicing into his steak with unnecessary vigor, "you need to learn to delegate. That is what I keep telling the board. We are too operational. Not enough vision. I am tired because I spent the morning ensuring our biggest client did not fire us," I said quietly. Mason waved a hand dismissively. "Details. You get bogged down in the weeds. That is why Roderick and I were talking. We need to elevate the leadership perspective." I froze. Roderick Vale was the chairman of our board, a man who viewed North Star not as a manufacturing company, but as a yield-generating asset in a diversified portfolio. He tolerated my father because my father made him rich. He tolerated me because I made the numbers work. But he liked Mason. He liked Mason because Mason played golf, drank single malt scotch, and never bored him with talk of supply chains or safety protocols. "You were meeting with Roderick?" I asked. Mason smiled. a wide, charming expression that made him look like the golden boy he had always been. Just a casual lunch. He introduced me to some people from Halden Row Capital. Very sharp guys. They specialize in modernization. My stomach turned over. Halden Row was not a modernization firm. They were a private equity group known in the industry for two things: loading companies with debt and stripping them for parts. Modernization. I repeated. Mason. Halden Row buys companies to gut them. They lay off 40% of the workforce within the first year. Why would you even take a meeting with them? Elaine looked up, her eyes wide. Now, Gabriella, do not be so negative. Mason is just exploring options. Roderick thinks very highly of him. He says Mason has your father's charisma. Charisma does not balance the books. Mother, I said, perhaps too sharply. Mason leaned back, swirling his wine. See? This is the resistance to change I was talking about. The market is shifting. Gabby, we can't just be a mid-sized parts supplier forever. We need liquidity. We need to unlock value. Halden Row sees the potential in the brand. There is no brand without the plants. I said, there is no value if we sell off the assets. It is inevitable, Mason said. And the way he said it sent a chill down my spine. It was not a suggestion. It sounded like a done deal. The board is ready for a new chapter. A fresh face. I looked at my mother. She was smiling at Mason, oblivious to the fact that he was talking about selling the legacy her husband had built with his bare hands. She just saw her handsome son, looking like a captain of industry. I realized then that I was not just fighting a bad business decision. I was fighting a narrative that had already been written. The next 2 weeks at the office were a study in psychological warfare. Mason, who usually rolled in at 10 and left for a late lunch at 1, started arriving at 7. He wore new suits, sharper cuts, navy blues and charcoals. He walked the hallways with a strut, stopping to clap executives on the back, laughing loudly at jokes that were not funny. He began dropping names in meetings. I was speaking with the guys at Chase. He would say during a budget review, "They think our leverage ratio is too conservative," or, "Halden Row has an interesting model for this." He never offered a concrete plan. He never produced a spreadsheet or a risk assessment. It was all smoke. But to the senior leadership team, it looked like fire. They were tired of my austerity. They were tired of me telling them we could not afford new office furniture because we needed to upgrade the ventilation system in Plant B. Mason offered them a fantasy where money was free and strategy was just a matter of attitude. I was in the middle of reviewing the quarterly logistics report when Mason leaned into my doorway. "Knock, knock," he said. I didn't look up. "What do you need?" "Mason?" "Just checking on the plant whisperer," he said. I stopped typing. I slowly swiveled my chair to face him. "Excuse me?" "It is a compliment." "Gabby." He walked in and sat on the edge of my desk, invading my space. "You are so good with the machinery, the nuts and bolts, the blue-collar stuff. The board appreciates that. They know the plants would fall apart without you." "But?" I asked. "But they also know that is where your ceiling is." He shrugged. A gesture of mock sympathy. "You are an operator. Gabby, you are incredible at it. But the company needs a face. It needs someone who can talk to the street. And you are the face." I said. "I am just trying to protect you," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Roderick and I have been discussing a realignment. We think you would be perfect for a new role, Chief People Officer, or maybe VP of Culture and Compliance. Something where you can focus on the employees. Make sure everyone is happy, while the big boys handle the financing." It was a masterstroke of condescension. He was offering to demote me to a glorified HR manager and framing it as a favor. I stood up. "I am the Director of Operations. Mason, I run this company. I do not need you to protect me. I need you to stop playing CEO before you break something." He laughed, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Always so serious. That is your problem. Sis, you need to learn to relax. The future is coming whether you like it or not." He walked out, leaving the door open. I stared after him, my heart hammering against my ribs. He wasn't just posturing, he was confident. Later that afternoon, Priya Suri, our CFO, closed my office door and locked it. Priya was 5 feet tall, brilliant, and the only person in the C-suite I trusted completely. She looked terrified. "You did not hear this from me," Priya whispered, sitting on the edge of the chair. "Hear what?" "Roderick has called a closed session for the board next Tuesday. No minutes, no recording. The topic is governance restructuring." My mouth went dry. "That means a leadership change." "Yes. And Gabriella, your name came up in the pre-read materials, not as a candidate for promotion." "Then how?" "Risk containment," Priya said. Looking down at her hands, the phrase was used 3 times. "They are building a case that you are a bottleneck, that you are resistant to the modernization strategy. Mason has been feeding them data. Gabby. Charts showing that our growth is stagnant compared to the sector average. He is blaming your conservative spending for our lack of expansion." I felt a cold anger settling in my chest. My conservative spending is the only reason we have cash reserves. I know that. You know that. But the board sees a flat line on a graph, and Mason promises a hockey stick curve. They are greedy. Gabriella. And Mason is feeding them exactly what they want to eat. "There is something else," I said. I opened my drawer and pulled out a stack of invoices I had flagged that morning. "Have you ever heard of a vendor called Juniper Ridge Advisory?" Priya frowned. Taking the papers, "No." "Who are they?" "I don't know. But in the last 3 months, we have paid them $150,000. Look at the description of services." Priya adjusted her glasses. "Process consulting, strategic alignment, stakeholder engagement. This is garbage language." "Exactly. And look at the signature." Priya squinted at the authorization line. "That looks like your signature." "It looks like it," I said, "but it is not. The loop on the G is too wide. And look at the date on this one. October 12th. I was in Cleveland that day inspecting the stamping presses. I physically could not have signed a physical check requisition in Chicago." Priya looked up, her face pale. "Someone is forging your signature to pay a shell company? Or someone is using my digital credentials?" I said, "I checked the system logs. These were approved using my ID, but from an IP address I do not recognize." "If this is fraud," Priya said, her voice trembling, "and they pin it on you, that is not just firing you, that is cause, that is criminal. Risk containment," I repeated. "Mason isn't just trying to push me out. He is setting me up to take the fall for bleeding the company dry. I need you to dig. Priya, find out where that money is going." Quietly, I left the office early, needing to clear my head. I drove out to Lake Briar, the suburb where our original plant was located. It was a sprawling brick complex, built in the 70s, smelling of oil and industry. This was my sanctuary. The noise of the presses, the rhythm of the line. It made sense to me in a way the boardroom never did. I found Tom Kowalski, the floor supervisor, in his glass-walled office overlooking the assembly floor. He looked surprised to see me. "Ms. Reed," he said, standing up. "We were not expecting you. I was just in the neighborhood." "Tom, how is the new safety protocol holding up?" He hesitated, shifting his weight. "Well, we are doing the best we can. You know how it is." "No," I said. "Tell me." "Well, with the training budget cut, we had to cancel the certification refresher for the forklift operators. We are doing on-the-job shadowing instead. But, honestly, I am nervous. We have 2 new guys on the night shift who are green." "Wait," I said. I cut him off. "What training budget cut?" Tom looked confused. He shuffled through a pile of papers on his desk. "The memo we got last week, from corporate." He handed me a sheet of paper. 2. Plant management. From Office of the Director of Operations. Subject, Q4 budget adjustments. Effective immediately. All non-essential training and external certification programs are suspended to align with fiscal efficiency targets. It was signed with my name, a digital stamp. I stared at the paper. My hands were shaking. Safety training was not non-essential. It was the only thing standing between our workers and a catastrophic injury. I had never written this. I would never write this. "Tom," I said, keeping my voice steady. Ignore this memo. Rebook the training. Put it on my personal credit card if you have to. But get those men certified. You got it. Ms. Reed, is everything okay? Everything is fine. I lied. Just a clerical error. I walked back to my car, the gravel crunching under my boots. The anger was no longer cold. It was hot, burning in my throat. This wasn't just about money or titles anymore. Mason, or whoever was pulling his strings, was risking lives to save a few pennies to pad the bottom line for a sale. They were using my name to do it. I drove straight to the office of Meredith Klein, our general counsel. Meredith was a sharp, unsentimental woman who had survived 3 CEO transitions. She kept her office like a fortress. I need to talk to you about the board, I said, walking in without knocking. Meredith didn't look up from her laptop. I cannot discuss board matters with you, Gabriella. You know the bylaws. I am not asking for secrets. Meredith, I am telling you that someone is forging my signature on budget cuts that violate OSHA regulations. I am telling you that suspicious payments are being made to a vendor that does not exist. Meredith stopped typing. She took off her reading glasses and looked at me. Her eyes were unreadable. Do you have proof? She asked. I have a memo I didn't write, and invoices I didn't sign. Meredith sighed. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Gabriella, you are a smart woman. You know how the game is played. If you make accusations like that right now, without irrefutable evidence, you will look like a disgruntled employee trying to sabotage the new leadership. So I am supposed to do nothing? I am advising you, as the company attorney, to document everything, keep copies, keep logs, but be very, very careful. She turned back to me, and her voice dropped. They do not move this fast without a narrative. Gabriella, the story is already being told. If you try to shout over it, you will just be noise. You need your own story. I left her office feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The walls were closing in. My brother, my mother, the board, even the lawyer. They were all part of a machine that was grinding me down. I went home, but not to my apartment. I went to my mother's house. I knew she was out at her bridge club on Thursday nights. I let myself in with my key and went straight to my father's old study. It had been kept exactly as he left it when he died 5 years ago. The smell of his pipe tobacco still lingered in the curtains. I sat in his chair. The leather cracked and worn. I needed to understand. My father was a meticulous man. He wouldn't have left the company vulnerable like this. He wouldn't have left me vulnerable. I unlocked the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet. My mother never touched this. She found it too painful. I pulled out the dusty hanging folders, tax returns, deeds, patent filings, and then a blue folder labeled simply Governance. Inside, there were draft bylaws, shareholder agreements, and a handwritten note on yellow legal pad paper. My father's handwriting was jagged, hurried. The Vale Voting Trust. The note read, Roderick wants control in exchange for the bridge loan. I had to give him the proxy option, but only in extreme instability. If I die, the trust activates to protect the family interest. Then, underlined 3 times, watch the springing clause. It is the kill switch. And below that, a scrawled warning that made my breath catch in my throat. Never let Mason sign a loan. He knew, even back then, he knew. He knew Mason was weak, or easily led, or just too hungry for validation. He had tried to warn me from the grave. I took a picture of the note with my phone and shoved the folder back into the drawer. I locked the cabinet and stood up, my mind racing. The springing clause. Extreme instability. That was the play. They weren't just firing me for incompetence. They were manufacturing instability, shipping delays, safety cuts, financial irregularities, to trigger this clause in the voting trust. If they could prove the company was in chaos under my operations management, Roderick Vale could seize total voting control from the family. He could sell to Halden Row without my mother's vote, without my vote, without anyone stopping him, and Mason was the useful idiot making it happen, thinking he was becoming a partner when he was actually the demolition crew. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an email. A calendar invitation sent to the entire executive distribution list. Subject: Partnership Announcement Reception. Host: Roderick Vale. Mason Reed. Date: next Wednesday, 7 p.m. Location: the Drake Hotel, Grand Ballroom. Please join us to celebrate the next chapter of North Star Components Group and the official appointment of Mason Reed as managing partner. I stared at the screen. The board meeting wasn't until Tuesday. They hadn't voted yet. They were announcing the victory before the battle had even been fought. It was arrogant. It was insulting. And it was the biggest mistake they could have made. Because now I knew the timeline. I had 6 days. 6 days to unravel a conspiracy, secure millions of dollars, and save my father's legacy. I walked out of the study, the darkness of the house pressing in around me. I wasn't the plant whisperer anymore. I wasn't the tired sister. I was the enemy, and they had no idea I was coming. The following Monday, I became a ghost in my own office. To the visible world, I was Gabriella Reed, the dutiful director of operations, executing every task with machine-like precision. I approved supply requisitions before the ink was dry. I walked the floor of the Chicago plant, knowing the names of every shift supervisor's children. I sat in strategy meetings with a notebook, nodding politely while Mason spoke in buzzwords that dissolved upon contact with reality, but underneath that veneer. I was running a forensic counter operation. Every evening after 6, when the executive wing emptied out, I went to Priya's office. We did not turn on the overhead lights. We worked by the glow of her dual monitors, the blue light reflecting off her glasses as we peeled back the layers of North Star's ledger. "It is worse than we thought," Priya said on the third night. Her voice was barely a whisper, though the floor was deserted. She spun the monitor toward me. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the rows of data. We had pulled the vendor profile for Juniper Ridge Advisory. On the surface, it looked legitimate. There was a tax identification number, a billing address, and a generic website full of stock photos of people shaking hands in glass conference rooms. But Priya had dug deeper. I ran a search on the registered address. Priya said, 1140 Market Street, Suite 200, Brighton Harbor, Delaware. "I know that address," I said, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. "It is a registered agent service. There are 5,000 companies legally domiciled in that one suite. It is a shell." "Priya, who owns it? That is the problem," she said. "Delaware law protects the anonymity of the beneficial owners. But look at the service descriptions on the invoices." I read the line items out loud. Market penetration analysis, supply chain optimization framework, leadership competency modeling. I looked at Priya. "We pay McKinnon and Associates for supply chain optimization. We have a retainer with them." "Exactly," Priya said. "And we have a subscription to Gartner for market analysis. This work is redundant. We are paying Juniper Ridge $12,000 a month for reports that, if they exist, are just copy-pasted from work we already own. And I supposedly approved it." I said. Priya nodded slowly. "The digital authorization logs show your user ID approving the contract on September 4th at 11 at night. I was asleep at 11 at night on September 4th. I said, "I know," Priya said. "But the board will not know that. They will just see the log." I sat back, rubbing my eyes. The office was silent, save for the hum of the HVAC system. It was a terrifying realization. Someone was not just stealing money. They were stealing my identity to do it. They were building a paper trail that painted me as incompetent at best and corrupt at worst. "I need the metadata." I said, "I need to know which terminal was used to access my account." "I am trying," Priya said. "But IT has locked down the admin logs. I need a higher clearance level. Mason has it. Roderick has it. I do not. Keep looking." I said, "There has to be a mistake, a slip-up." While I hunted for numbers, Mason hunted for hearts and minds. He launched a series of listening sessions with the department heads. He called them Vision 2030 meetings. He held them in the boardroom, ordering catered lunches from the expensive Italian place down the street, while I ate a sandwich at my desk and negotiated steel prices. I walked past the glass wall of the conference room on Wednesday and saw him holding court. He had his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, leaning forward with that earnest, boyish expression that made people want to please him. He was talking to the heads of sales, marketing, and surprisingly, logistics. I did not have to guess what he was saying. The feedback loop in a company this size is short. Later that afternoon, I ran into Sarah Jenkins, our VP of Sales, by the coffee machine. Sarah and I had worked together for 8 years. We had survived the recession together, but when she saw me, she hesitated. "Hey, Gabriella," she said, her smile tight. "Hi, Sarah. How was the session with Mason?" "Oh, interesting. He has a lot of big ideas." I stirred my coffee, keeping my voice casual. "Anything specific?" She looked at her shoes. "Well, he mentioned that we might be held back by legacy processes. He thinks we are too risk-averse. He said some leadership styles are better suited for maintenance and others for growth." I felt the sting of it. Maintenance. That was code for me, the janitor, the person who cleans up the mess so the rock stars can party. Did he mention that our risk aversion is the reason we have zero debt and cash on hand? I asked. Sarah gave a nervous laugh. "He did say you would say that. He said you are very protective of the old ways, that it is charming. The word hung in the air like a foul smell. He was patting me on the head while he sharpened the knife. It wasn't just talk. Small operational hiccups began to leak out to the general staff. A late shipment here, a scheduling conflict there. Routine issues that I usually solved before lunch were suddenly being discussed in the break room. "Did you hear?" Someone whispered as I walked by a cubicle bank. The Detroit shipment was delayed again. I heard Gabriella forgot to sign the release. It was a lie, but in the absence of truth, rumor becomes fact. Mason was curating a reality where I was overwhelmed, aging, and losing my grip. I needed help. Not internal help. Everyone inside the building was either compromised or afraid. I needed a shark. Nadine Cross met me at a diner on the outskirts of the city. Nadine was 70 years old, a retired community banker who had given my father his first loan when North Star was just a blueprint and a dream. She wore a tweed blazer and looked at me with eyes that had seen every kind of corporate fraud imaginable. "You are in a vice, Gabby," she said. After I explained the situation, "Roderick Vale is a predator. He has been waiting for your father's ghost to fade so he can cash out. And your brother, well, Mason always liked the applause more than the work. I need to stop the vote." I said, "If the board votes to sell to Halden Row next week, it is over. You cannot stop the vote," Nadine said. "But you can buy the company." "I don't have that kind of capital." "Nadine, no. But you have the operating history. You have the relationships. You need a lawyer who understands the dirty game. Not Meredith Klein. She is a corporate creature. You need a litigator who understands governance warfare." She wrote a name on a napkin. Lionel Hart. "He is expensive," she warned, "and he is not nice. But if you want to keep your company, he is the only call you make." I met Lionel Hart the next morning in a glass-walled office that looked down on the Chicago River. He was a man of sharp angles, sharp suit, sharp nose, sharp eyes. He listened to my story without interrupting, tapping a silver pen against his legal pad. When I finished, he sat back. "You are focusing on the fraud," he said. His voice was dry, precise. "The invoices, the forged signatures, that is good for leverage later. But it will not save your company next week. Why not?" I asked. "It proves they are unethical." "It proves someone is unethical," he corrected. "Can you prove it is Mason? Can you prove it is Roderick? Or will they just blame a rogue employee and fire you for lack of oversight?" I stayed silent. He was right. "Control," Lionel said, leaning forward. "That is all that matters. Who holds the paper?" "My mother holds 30%. I said, "The Vale Trust holds 20%. I hold 10. Mason holds 10. The rest is scattered among minority shareholders." Lionel did the math instantly. "So, if Vale and your brother align, they have 30%. If they convince the minority bloc, they can hit 51. Your mother is the swing vote. My mother thinks Mason is the second coming. I said bitterly, she will vote with him. Then we have to break the trust. Lionel said, or we have to buy the minority bloc before they do. He pulled out a thick binder. I did some preliminary research on your shareholder list. It is a mess. Former employees, widows, local businessmen, people who bought in 20 years ago and forgot they own the stock. If I can unify them. I said, it is a long shot. Lionel said, but here is the key. The Vale Trust. You said your father left a note about a springing clause? Yes. If we can prove that Roderick Vale is engineering instability to trigger that clause, to seize your mother's voting rights, then we have a breach of fiduciary duty. We can sue for an injunction, we can freeze the board, but we need proof. I said, real proof. Lionel stood up. Go back to the office. Gabriella, keep your head down. Let them think they have won. People get sloppy when they think the victory parade is already scheduled. Find me the trigger. Find me the specific act of sabotage they are using to justify the takeover. The partnership announcement reception was held on a Friday night. 3 days before the board meeting, it was a black-tie affair at the Art Institute, a venue chosen to project maximum elegance and stability. I wore a black dress that felt like armor. I walked into the room and felt the atmosphere shift. The conversations didn't stop, but they changed pitch. Eyes darted toward me, then away. I was the dead woman walking. The guest of honor at my own funeral. Mason was in his element. He stood near the bar, holding a crystal tumbler, surrounded by board members and the slick-haired representatives from Halden Row. He looked handsome, successful, and utterly at ease. Roderick Vale, a man with silver hair and a smile that never reached his eyes, had his arm around Mason's shoulder. Gabriella, Roderick called out when he saw me. He waved me over. The crowd parted. Roderick kissed me on the cheek. It felt cold. We were just talking about the future. Mason has some incredible ideas for the digital transformation. I bet he does. I said, keeping my smile fixed. Mason beamed. Gabby is the backbone of the operation. Roderick, we could not do this without her. It was a performance. They were showing the world that the family was united, that the transition was seamless. If I caused a scene now, I would look hysterical. I would prove their point that I was unstable. So I played my part. I nodded. I smiled. I accepted a glass of champagne I had no intention of drinking. I drifted to the edge of the room, watching. I saw who Mason talked to. I saw who Roderick whispered to. And then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Meredith Klein, our general counsel, was standing in a corner with a man I didn't recognize. He was short, balding, and wore a suit that cost more than my car. He handed Meredith a thick envelope. She slipped it into her clutch quickly. Looking around to see if anyone had noticed, I memorized his face. Later in the evening, I stepped out onto the terrace for air. The city lights reflected off the dark water of the lake. Ms. Reed? I turned. It was Frank Miller, the plant manager from the Chicago facility, the man who had been ready to punch a wall over the shipping delay. He looked uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo. Hello, Frank. You clean up nice. He didn't smile. Look, I shouldn't be telling you this. I got a family to feed. What is it? Frank, Mason's assistant. That new girl? Jessica? She came down to the plant yesterday. I stiffened. What did she want? She wanted the incident logs from the last 5 years. That is public record. Frank, she could get that from HR. Yeah, but she didn't just want the logs. She asked me specifically to pull the ones that looked the worst, the ones where the root cause was listed as managerial oversight or process failure. My heart hammered against my ribs. She told me, Frank continued, looking at his hands, that they needed them for the insurance audit. But Ms. Reed, we don't have an insurance audit this year. No, we don't, I said softly. They are building a file on you. Frank said, they're going to say you ran a loose ship, that you ignored safety. Thank you. Frank? He nodded and went back inside. I stood there, gripping the stone railing. It was the risk containment narrative. They were cherry-picking 5 years of minor errors to paint a picture of systemic negligence. They were going to argue that I was a liability, and if I was a liability, then the company was unstable. And if the company was unstable, the Vail Trust could trigger the springing proxy. It was a closed loop. They created the instability, blamed it on me, and then used it to seize power. The next morning, Saturday, I went back to the office. The building was empty. I needed to trace the airline dispatch contract. That shipping delay in Part 1, the one that almost cost us the Ford account, was the perfect example of instability. I logged into the procurement database. I found the airline contract. It had been signed 3 weeks ago. I pulled up the metadata. Signed by G. Reed. Date, October 20th. Time, 2:15 p.m. I checked my calendar for October 20th. I was in a quarterly review meeting with the sales team from 2 to 4. I was in the building. I could have signed it. But I didn't. I remembered that day. I remembered the sales team arguing about commission structures. I didn't sign any vendor contracts. I looked closer at the contract terms. It was a rush job. Higher rates, lower liability caps for the carrier. It was a bad contract, a contract I never would have approved. Then I saw the digital fingerprint. Every user on our network has a unique machine ID. My laptop ended in 449. The machine ID that signed the contract ended in 882. I pulled up the asset inventory list. I scrolled down, my finger tracing the lines on the screen until I found it. Asset 882. Executive Workstation. M. Reed. Mason. He hadn't even been clever about it. He had logged into my account from his own computer. He must have guessed my password. Or, more likely, he had asked IT to reset it for his sister, and they had complied because he was the heir apparent. He signed a bad contract with my name to cause a shipping crisis, just so he could point to it later and say, "Look, Gabriella is losing control." I printed the logs. I printed the contract. I printed the asset list. I walked down the hall to Priya's office. She was there, as I knew she would be. She looked exhausted. Her desk was covered in spreadsheets. "Priya," I said, "I found it." Mason signed the airline contract. Priya didn't look up. She was staring at a document in front of her. "Gabriella," she said, her voice shaking. "You need to leave." "What?" "You need to stop coming to me. You need to stop asking me to dig." "Priya, what is wrong?" She looked up, and I saw she had been crying. "Halden Rose bankers called me this morning. They want the pro forma financials for the acquisition. So, give them the standard projections. They don't want the standard projections." "Gabriella," she slammed her hand on the desk. "They gave me the assumptions they want me to use." She slid a piece of paper across the desk. I picked it up. It was a list of synergy targets. Reduction in force. 35% within 6 months. Divestiture of Lake Briar facility. Q1 next year. Liquidation of pension fund surplus. I felt sick. They weren't just buying the company. They were gutting it. They were going to fire Frank Miller. They were going to close the plant my father built. They were going to raid the pension fund that hundreds of our retirees depended on. And they are telling me, Priya whispered, that if I don't certify these numbers, if I don't play ball, then when the deal goes through, I am out. No severance, no reference, and they will audit my books until they find a mistake to sue me for. They are blackmailing you. I said, she nodded. They told me to stay in my lane. They told me you are toxic, Gabriella. That anyone standing next to you when the ship goes down is going to drown too. I reached across the desk and took her hand. Her skin was cold. You don't have to do this. Priya, I have a mortgage. Gabriella, I have 2 kids in college. I can't fight them. I'm not you. I looked at the synergy list again. This was the smoking gun. This proved that the modernization was a lie. It proved that the board was acting against the best interests of the corporation, which was a violation of their duty. Can I keep this? I asked. Priya hesitated. Then she nodded. Just, don't tell them I gave it to you. Please. I took the paper. I promise. Sunday afternoon. I went to see my mother. The house was quiet. Sunday was usually family dinner, but there was no dinner today. The tension was too high. Elaine was in the sunroom, arranging flowers. She looked frail. The stress of the transition was wearing on her too. "Mother," I said, "we need to talk." She snipped a stem off a rose. "Not about business." "Gabriella, I am tired of business. Mason says everything is on track for Tuesday." "Mason is lying to you," I said. She put the shears down with a sharp clatter. "Stop it. I will not have this jealousy. It is not jealousy." I pulled the Synergy Targets sheet from my purse. "Look at this. This is what they are planning. They are going to close Lake Briar. They are going to fire a third of the staff. Dad's people. Mother." She refused to look at the paper. "It is just numbers. Gabriella, business changes. Your father knew that. My father left a note." I said, my voice trembling. "In his file. He warned me about the Vale Trust. He warned me about Roderick." Elaine went rigid. "You were in your father's files?" "Yes. I found the warning. Never let Mason sign a loan." "Why did he write that, Mother?" "Because he was a controlling man," Elaine shouted. Her voice cracked, sudden and shrill. She turned to me, her eyes wet. "He didn't trust anyone. He didn't trust me. He didn't trust Mason. He only trusted you because you are exactly like him, cold, obsessive." I stepped back, stung. "He handled the shares," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I didn't want to know. I just wanted peace. And now Roderick says he can give us peace. He says if we sell, we never have to worry about the plants or the unions or the supply chains ever again. We can just be—" "And you believe him?" "I trust him," she said defiantly. "He was your father's friend. He is a shark, Mother, and he is eating your son alive." "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Don't you dare start a war with your brother. If you ruin this for him, if you humiliate him, I will never forgive you." I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. She knew. Deep down, she knew Mason wasn't capable. She knew Roderick was manipulating them. But she preferred the beautiful lie to the ugly truth. She would rather sacrifice the company than face the reality that her golden boy was a failure. I realized then that I could not save her. I had to defeat her. I walked out of the house without another word. I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel. I felt hollowed out. My ally Priya was broken. My mother was an enemy. The board was rigged. The timeline was impossible. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I picked it up. It was a text message. Unknown number. I opened it. "Look at the consulting payments. Your name is on purpose." My heart skipped a beat. A second message came through. An image. It was a screenshot of a system I didn't have access to. The internal audit log for the Juniper Ridge payments. It showed the payments being authorized. It showed my user ID, but then it showed a column I hadn't seen before. Approval route. Override. Authorized. Vale. Roderick Vale. He hadn't just watched Mason do it. He had authorized the override himself. He had manually forced the payments through using my credentials as a mask. I stared at the screen. "Who sent this?" I typed back. "Who is this?" The dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "Check the metadata on the image." I saved the image and opened the file details. The location tag was stripped, but the author field in the properties wasn't empty. It read, M. Klein, Meredith Klein, the General Counsel, the woman who told me she couldn't help me, the woman I saw taking an envelope at the gala. She was playing both sides, or maybe, just maybe, she had found a line she wasn't willing to cross. I started the car. The engine roared to life. I had the proof. I had the motive. And now, I had a leak inside the fortress. The war my mother feared? It had just begun. The metadata from the screenshot did not lie, but it did not tell the whole story either. It told me that the image of the fraudulent authorization log had been created on a device registered to Meredith Klein. It did not tell me who sent it to me, or why. I sat in my home office, the glow of the monitor the only light in the room. It was 3 a.m. I was looking at the IP address logs again, cross-referencing them with the building's security badge swipes. The invoices for Juniper Ridge had been approved at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. I checked the badge logs for that night. No one had entered the building between midnight and 5. That meant the approval did not happen from a remote connection. It happened from a device physically inside the network that was never turned off. I traced the node. It was the dedicated telepresence server in the main executive boardroom, the one used for video conferences. It had a touch-screen console. Someone had walked into the boardroom during the day, logged into the console using my stolen credentials, and scheduled the approval to execute in the middle of the night. It was clever. It bypassed the VPN logs. It looked like a system glitch or a remote hack, giving them plausible deniability. But what chilled me wasn't the technical sophistication, it was the implication. If they were going to this much trouble to pin financial mismanagement on me, they weren't just going to fire me, they were going to prosecute me. They were building a case to destroy my reputation so thoroughly that I would never work in this industry again. I would not just be the ousted sister, I would be the cautionary tale. I needed a shield, and I needed a sword. I met Lionel Hart at his office at 7 the next morning. I looked like I hadn't slept. Because I hadn't. I laid the screenshot and my findings on his mahogany desk. "This is fraud." "Lionel," I said. He glanced at it, then pushed it aside. "It is evidence. But evidence of what? That your credentials were compromised? They will say you were careless with your passwords. That is still cause for termination." He poured 2 cups of black coffee. "Gabriella, stop acting like a defendant. You cannot win this by proving you are innocent. You can only win by taking away their power to judge you." "You want me to buy the company?" I said. "I want you to stage a management-led buyout," he corrected. "The board wants to sell. They have made that clear. Halden Rowe is offering them an exit. You need to offer them a better one, or at least a safer one. I don't have $50 million. Lionel, no. But you have the narrative of stability. Halden Rowe is a predator. The minority shareholders are prey. If you can convince the minority bloc that Halden Rowe will dilute their shares or trigger tax events they aren't ready for, they might back you. And the money? Debt and equity. We need a lead investor, and we need a bank that isn't in Roderick Vale's pocket. He slid a business card across the desk. Harborstone Commercial Bank. Ask for Sarah Lynn. She is tough, but she does not care about the country club politics. I went to Harborstone that afternoon. The bank was located in the Loop, a building of glass and steel that felt impersonal and cold. Sarah Lynn was younger than I expected, perhaps 40, with a razor-sharp bob and a suit that cost more than my first car. She listened to my pitch. I laid out the financials of North Star, the real financials, not the ones Mason was inflating. I showed her the cash flow, the asset base, the low debt ratio. The fundamentals are strong. "Ms. Lynn," I said, "I can service the acquisition debt from operating cash flow within 3 years." She looked at the papers, then at me. Her expression was unreadable. "Your numbers work, Ms. Reed. On paper. You are a perfect borrower. You know the operations better than anyone, but?" I asked, hearing the hesitation in her voice. "But bankers talk," she said, "and the word on the street is that North Star is in distress. There are rumors of compliance failures, safety violations, accounting irregularities. That is a manufactured narrative," I said, my voice rising. "My brother is creating chaos to justify a sale to private equity." Sarah leaned back. "I believe you. My analysts have seen Halden Rowe's playbook before, but belief does not underwrite alone. If I take this to my credit committee, and the next day the Wall Street Journal runs a story about you being investigated for fraud, I lose my job. So you are saying no?" "I am saying not yet." She tapped the file. "I need a clean narrative. You need to neutralize the allegations. If you can bring me a clean bill of health, an independent audit, a retraction, something concrete, I will fund the debt portion of your buyout. But I cannot back a burning building." I left the bank feeling heavy. I had the competence, but I didn't have the perception. And in Roderick Vale's world, Perception was the only currency that mattered. I went back to the office to regroup with Priya. She was looking pale, her eyes darting toward the door every time someone walked past. "I found another one," she whispered as soon as I closed the door. "Another Juniper Ridge invoice?" "No, different shell company. Apex Horizon Solutions, also registered in Brighton Harbor." "What is the service?" I asked. "Executive leadership coaching and brand development." I frowned. "For who?" "For Mason." I stared at the invoice. It was for $25,000 a month. Mason was billing the company to teach him how to look like a CEO. He is paying a consultant to polish his image while he dismantles the business, I said, disgust rising in my throat. "It is routed through the same payment processor as the Juniper Ridge fraud." Priya said, "Same IP address for approval." This was good. It was petty, but it established a pattern. Mason wasn't just malicious. He was greedy, and greedy people made mistakes. "I need you to print everything." "Priya, every single line item." We worked until 8, when I finally left the building. I felt a strange sense of calm. The pieces were coming together. I just needed the soldiers. Doctor. Simon Kell lived in a brownstone in the Gold Coast that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. He was 80 years old, a retired chemical engineer who had invested in North Star when my father was still working out of a garage. He held 5% of the stock. He offered me tea in a porcelain cup that looked like it would shatter if I held it too tight. "I heard about the commotion," Simon said, his voice raspy. "Mason is making a lot of noise. He is destroying the company." Simon sighed. "He is a showman. Your father was a builder. Mason is, well, he is a salesman. He is selling us out." I said, "He is bringing in Halden Row." "I know. Roderick sent me the prospectus. And you are okay with that?" Simon looked at me over his spectacles. "Gabriella, I am an old man. Liquidity is attractive. And frankly," he hesitated, "frankly, the board thinks you are too soft." "Too soft?" I repeated, setting my cup down. "You are operational," Simon said. "You care about the people." "That is noble, but it is not how you survive a hostile market. They think you will let the union walk all over you. They think you are afraid to cut the dead weight." I stood up. I walked to his desk and opened my briefcase. I pulled out 3 binders. "This is the efficiency analysis of the Lake Briar plant," I said, dropping the first binder. "We are running at 92% efficiency, up from 85% 3 years ago. I achieved that without firing a single person. I did it by renegotiating our raw material contracts and optimizing the shift logic." I dropped the second binder. "This is the union negotiation strategy. I locked in a 5-year no-strike clause in exchange for a cost of living adjustment that is half of what the industry average is. Because the workers trust me to keep the plant open. That saved us $4 million in potential downtime risks." I dropped the third binder. "And this is the projection for next year if we pivot to the medical device casing market. A market Mason doesn't even know exists. It represents 20% growth, real growth, not financial engineering." I leaned over the desk. "I am not soft. Simon, I am effective. Mason is burning the furniture to heat the house. I am building a furnace." Simon looked at the binders. He opened the first one and ran a finger down the column of numbers. He read for a long time. When he looked up, there was a glint in his eye I hadn't seen before. "Your father used to shout." He said, "You bring data. Data is harder to argue with." I said, "If you make a move," Simon said quietly, closing the binder, "if you make a move to buy them out. Do you have the capital?" "I am working on it. But I need your vote. If the money is real." Simon said, "You have my 5%. I walked out of his house feeling the first spark of hope. 5%. I had my 10. That was 15. I needed 36 more to control the company. The next day, Mason invited me to lunch. He picked a steakhouse downtown, the kind of place where the waiters wore white jackets and the menu didn't have prices. He was already seated when I arrived, sipping a martini. "Gabby!" he called out, standing up to hug me. I stiffened, but let him do it. He smelled of expensive cologne and confidence. "You look great," he said, sitting back down. "Really, the stress isn't showing at all. What do you want?" "Mason?" I asked, unfolding my napkin. "Direct as always." "I like that. Roderick likes that too. You know, he respects your intensity." He took a sip of his drink. "Look, things are moving fast. The board is very excited about the Halden Row partnership. We are looking at signing the letter of intent next week." "I know." I said, "I want to make sure you are taken care of," Mason said. He leaned in, lowering his voice. "I convinced Roderick to carve out a retention package for you. How generous." "It is. Seriously, you get to keep your title, Director of Operations. But we are going to layer in a Chief Operating Officer above you, someone from Halden Row. You can learn a lot from them. So I get a babysitter." I said, "You get a mentor, and here's the kicker. If you hit the transition targets, which means helping us rationalize the workforce and clean up the operational risk, you get a 0.5% equity kicker." He smiled, waiting for me to be impressed. "Rationalize the workforce means firing Frank Miller, doesn't it?" I asked. "It means making hard choices." "Gabby, business is about hard choices, and cleaning up operational risk? That means admitting that I was incompetent before?" Mason sighed. Looking disappointed, "You are taking this personally. It is just a narrative. Gabby, we need to show the market there is a turnaround story. You are part of the turnaround. Be grateful I'm not pushing you out entirely. Roderick wanted to. You know, I saved you." I looked at him. He really believed it. He believed he was the hero of this story, and I was the damsel he was rescuing from her own limitations. "I will think about it." I said, "Take your time," he said, signaling the waiter, "but not too much time. The train is leaving the station." I left the lunch without eating. I had verified what I needed to know. There was no negotiation with Mason. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a scapegoat. I went straight to Lionel's office. "We need to talk about the trust," I said. Lionel pulled up the file. "The Vale Voting Trust. It holds 20% of the shares. Roderick Vale is the trustee." "Who administers it?" I asked. "It is not a person. It is a legal entity." Lionel checked the fine print. "Crestwell Fiduciary Services, a boutique firm." "I know them." I said, "They handle the pension fund administration. They are by the book." "Here's the thing," Lionel said, tapping the document. "The trust deed has a specific clause regarding the springing proxy." We knew that, but look at the definition of triggering event. I read the legalese. "In the event that the board of directors determines, by majority vote, that the stability of the management team is threatened by internal discord, gross negligence, or incapacity." Internal discord. I said, "That is the catch-all." Lionel said, "If Mason and Roderick can prove you are fighting them, that you are obstructing the modernization, they can declare internal discord. That triggers the clause. The voting rights for the family shares transfer from your mother to the trustee. Roderick gets total control. So if I fight back, I lose." I said, "Exactly. It is a trap. If you contest the sale publicly, you create discord. They trigger the trust. They vote your shares against you. Then we have to prove the discord is manufactured." I said, "We have to prove they are sabotaging the company to trigger the clause. That is a breach of the trust's purpose." "How?" Lionel asked. "It is your word against theirs. I need to know who is leaking my moves to them." I said, "Every time I find a discrepancy, they have an answer ready the next day. Someone is feeding them. We need a canary trap," Lionel said. The next morning, I created a document. It was a draft report titled Internal Audit, Inventory Variance Analysis, Plant B. In the report, I detailed a fictional discrepancy involving $2 million of missing copper wiring. It looked damning. It looked like exactly the kind of gross negligence they were hunting for. But I watermarked the file invisibly, and I changed one specific detail in the text. I cited a purchase order number, PO-99802. I saved the file on a flash drive. I walked into Meredith Klein's office. I closed the door. "Meredith," I said, looking distressed. I found something terrible. She looked up, her face a mask of professional concern. What is it, Gabriella? I handed her the flash drive. I think there is missing inventory at the Chicago plant. Significant amounts. I haven't told anyone else. I need you to look at the legal exposure before I report it to the board. Meredith took the drive. She looked at me, and for a second, I saw a flicker of hesitation. You haven't told Mason? She asked. No, only you. You are the general counsel. I trust you. She nodded slowly. You did the right thing. Gabriella, leave this with me. I will review it and let you know the best path forward. Thank you. Meredith. I walked out. My heart was pounding. If she was loyal, she would call me back in an hour to discuss a defense. If she was the leak, that file would be on Roderick's desk by noon. While I waited for the trap to spring, I met with Nadine Cross again. She had come through. She brought me to a conference room in a quiet, unassuming office building in the West Loop. The sign on the door said Larkhaven Industrial Partners. The partners were not men in Italian suits. They were serious, gray-haired men and women who looked like they read balance sheets for fun. Nadine introduced me. This is Gabriella Reed. She knows where every bolt in that factory is. We presented the plan. I didn't give them the sales pitch I gave Simon Kell. I gave them the ugly truth, the fraud, the sabotage, the looming hostile takeover. We are not interested in a proxy fight. The senior partner, a man named Sterling, said, We are patient capital. Ms. Reed, we like boring businesses that make money. North Star is exactly our profile. But we do not invest in civil wars. I am not asking you to fight a war. I said, I am asking you to back a peace treaty. If I can secure 51% of the votes, we bypass the board. We remove Roderick Vale. We stabilize the company. Sterling looked at his partners. Then he looked at me. If you can deliver the majority, we will underwrite the buyout. We will take out Halden Row. But we want 51% control. You stay on as CEO. You get 5% equity, but we own the shop. It was a hard pill. My father had owned it all. But 51% in friendly hands was better than 100% in a graveyard. I accept, I said. Good. Sterling slid a term sheet across the table. But this offer expires in 48 hours. If you can't deliver the votes by the board meeting, we walk. I had the money. Now I needed the proof. I went back to the office. It was late afternoon. My inbox pinged. It was an email from the board secretary. Urgent. Supplemental materials for Tuesday's meeting. I opened the attachment. It was a memo from the Governance Committee. Item 4. Risk Assessment Update. Recent findings have uncovered significant inventory control failures at the Chicago facility, specifically regarding raw copper discrepancies. I scrolled down. There it was. Reference: Purchase Order, PO-99802. I sat back in my chair. The trap had snapped shut. Meredith hadn't even waited a day. She had handed the file to Roderick immediately, and they had pasted it directly into the board packet to use as the final nail in my coffin. I printed the email. I printed the original file from my flash drive. I walked down the hall to Meredith's office. The door was open. She was packing her briefcase. Heading out? I asked, leaning against the door frame. Oh, Gabriella. Yes. Long day. Did you have a chance to review that file I gave you? I asked. She didn't look at me. She kept putting papers in her bag. I glanced at it. It is concerning. I am doing some background research before we discuss it. I want to make sure we have all the facts. Is that why it is in the board packet for Tuesday? I asked. Meredith froze. Her hand stopped halfway to her bag. I walked into the room and dropped the printout on her desk. PO-99802. That purchase order doesn't exist. Meredith, I made it up. It is a ghost, just like your ethics. She turned slowly to face me. Her face was pale, but her eyes were hard. You shouldn't have done that. Gabriella. Why? I asked. Why are you helping them? You sent me the warning about the consulting payments. You know they are committing fraud. I sent you the warning because I wanted you to leave, she hissed. She walked around the desk, closing the door. Do you think you can win this? Roderick Vale destroys people for sport. I was trying to give you a reason to resign with dignity before they crushed you. So you are protecting me by feeding them ammunition? I am protecting myself, Meredith snapped. I have seen what happens to people who stand in Roderick's way. I have a career. Gabriella, I am not going to throw it away for a sinking ship. The ship is sinking because you are boring holes in the hull. I said, "It is over," she said, regaining her composure. They have the votes. They have the narrative. And now, thanks to your little stunt, they have evidence of your incompetence. Who is going to believe you planted a fake report? They will just say you are trying to cover your tracks. I looked at her. She was right about one thing. It was going to be ugly, but she was wrong about it being over. I am not resigning. Meredith, and I suggest you hold on to that briefcase. You are going to need a lawyer of your own. I walked out. I had the leak. I had the money. I had the minority vote. But the board meeting was in 2 days, and Roderick Vale still held the trigger to the springing proxy. I had to disarm the bomb before I could storm the castle. I did not scream at Meredith Klein. I did not throw the fake inventory report in her face or demand she resign. Anger is a luxury, and I could not afford it. Instead, I stood in the doorway of her office, watching her knuckles turn white as she gripped the handle of her briefcase. I realized something. I said, my voice calm, almost bored. If we are presenting a risk assessment to the board on Tuesday, we need to be thorough. The Compliance Committee charter requires a full vendor review every 2 years. We are 3 months overdue. Meredith stared at me. She knew exactly what I was doing. She knew that if she refused, she was obstructing a mandatory governance process. If she agreed, she was handing me the keys to the archive. I will have my paralegal pull the files next week, she said tightly. After the board meeting, no. I said, tonight, I need hard copies of every vendor contract signed in the last 24 months, including amendments and side letters. I will wait. We stared at each other. The air conditioning hummed in the ceiling. A low drone that sounded like a countdown. Meredith looked at the phone on her desk. She wanted to call Roderick. She wanted to call Mason, but she couldn't. Calling the chairman to ask if she should withhold legal documents from the sitting director of operations was an admission of conspiracy. Fine, she said, dropping her briefcase. I will have them for you in an hour. I went back to my office and called Lionel Hart. She is scared. I told him, she will give me the paper trail. Good, Lionel said, but paper doesn't vote. You have 48 hours. Gabriella, the Larkhaven deal is contingent on you delivering 51%. You have 15. You need 36. I have a list. I said, get on the phone, Lionel commanded. And Gabriella? Sell the fear. These people don't care about EBITDA. They care about their dividends and their conscience. Remind them that Halden Row kills both. I spent the next 6 hours doing the hardest work of my life. I wasn't managing a supply chain. I was managing memories. I called Mrs. Gable, the widow of our first foreman, who held 2% of the stock. She lived in Florida now. Gabriella? She asked, her voice cracking over the line. Is everything all right? I got a letter from your brother about a modernization. It is a sale. Mrs. Gable, I said gently. Mason wants to sell the company to a firm that strips assets. They will likely close the Chicago plant. But my husband poured the concrete for that floor, she whispered. I know, and I want to keep it open. But I need your help. I need your proxy. I called Mr. Henderson, a retired supplier who had taken stock in lieu of payment during the recession of the early 90s. He was a hard man, a cynic. Why should I back you? He asked. Mason says the buyout price is $20 a share. That is a nice retirement gift. Because Halden Row pays in installments. I lied. Or rather, I extrapolated based on their history. And they load the holding company with debt. If the company goes bankrupt in 3 years, which is their model, those future payments disappear. My offer is cash. Mr. Henderson. Backed by Harborstone Bank. And I keep the customers who pay your residuals. I made 30 calls. I drank 4 cups of cold coffee. I listened to stories about my father, about the company picnics in the 80s, about the time the roof leaked and we all worked in raincoats. I wove those memories into a net, trying to catch enough votes to stop the avalanche. By midnight, I had verbal commitments for 20%. It was not enough. Tuesday morning arrived with a gray, suffocating sky. The atmosphere in the office was brittle. People walked quickly, eyes down, avoiding conversation. They knew something was happening. At 10 o'clock, an email landed in my inbox. It was from Mason. Subject: Strategic Partnership Update. Immediate action required to the executive team. Given the accelerated interest from our partners at Halden Row, the board has moved the vote to an emergency session immediately following tomorrow night's reception. We will be announcing the transition plan during the event. Please prepare a toast for the leadership handover. Best, Mason. He wasn't just moving the goalposts. He was burning the stadium. He wanted to do the deal in the middle of a party, surrounded by champagne and music, making it socially impossible for anyone to object. He was daring me to be the buzzkill. He was daring me to stand up in a room full of Chicago's elite and say, "No." I felt a wave of nausea. He was so confident. He must have known I was whipping votes. He didn't care. My door opened. It was Priya. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was clutching a folder to her chest. "Gabriella," she said, "I have to tell you something. Come in." "Priya, close the door." She sat down and put the folder on my desk. It was the invoice log. "I lied to you," she said, her voice shaking. "I told you I didn't know about the consulting payments. That wasn't entirely true." I waited. "I didn't push. The first invoice for Juniper Ridge," she said, "the one from 6 months ago. I flagged it. I saw it didn't have a countersignature. I called Mason's office. And? He put me on hold. Then he came back on the line and said you were in the room with him. He said you gave a verbal approval because you were driving to the airport. He said you told me to just get it done." Priya looked up at me, tears spilling over. I believed him. "Gabriella, I didn't think he would lie about you standing right there. I signed off on the wire. I opened the gate. I reached across the desk and put my hand on hers. Priya, listen to me. That is not your fault. That is social engineering. He used your trust in me against you, but I helped him." She sobbed. "I helped him steal from us. You can help me fix it." I said, "You are the CFO. Priya, you can trace the money flow better than anyone. Where did the airline money go?" She wiped her eyes and opened the folder. "That is what I came to show you." I dug into the airline dispatch contract, the one Mason signed with your digital ID. I looked at the pages she spread out. "There is a subclause in the addendum," Priya said, pointing to a paragraph in 8-point font. "Performance agnostic retainer." I read it. In the event of service disruption, the provider is guaranteed a base retainer of 15% of the total contract value to ensure capacity reservation. It means we pay them even if they fail. I said, "Exactly." Priya said, "The shipping delays, the bottlenecks. We paid penalties to our customers. But we paid bonuses to Aeroline. We paid them extra for being late." "And who owns Aeroline?" I asked. "It is a private LLC," Priya said. But I cross-referenced the signatory, a man named Trent Callahan. I felt a flash of recognition. Trent Callahan. I knew that name. He was Mason's roommate at business school. I said, "I met him at graduation." He was the one who threw up in the fountain. "He is getting a kickback." Priya said, "The amendment funnels money to Trent, regardless of performance. Mason isn't just generating chaos. He is paying his friends to create it." This was it. The instability wasn't just a strategy. It was a conspiracy to defraud the company. It was criminal. "Can you prove the money flow?" I asked. "I can prove the payments went to Trent," Priya said. "I can't prove Trent sent money back to Mason. Not without a subpoena." "That is enough." I said, "It establishes a conflict of interest that wasn't disclosed to the board. It voids the contract, and it implicates Mason in self-dealing." "Thank you. Priya, you just gave us a weapon. Armed with this, I requested a meeting with Roderick Vale. I didn't go to his office. I asked to meet him at the private club he frequented, a place with high ceilings and leather armchairs that swallowed you whole. I wanted him to feel comfortable. I wanted him to feel safe. He arrived 10 minutes late, ordering a sparkling water with a twist of lime. "Gabriella," he said, smiling that shark-like smile, "to what do I owe the pleasure? Mason tells me you are being difficult about the transition. I am not being difficult. Roderick, I am being protective." He sighed. "We all love the company, Gabriella. But let us be honest. You are an operator. You are brilliant at the plumbing. But the market has changed. We need a face. We need a story. Mason is the story. Mason is stealing from you." I said. Roderick didn't blink. He took a sip of his water. "That is a very serious accusation. It is a fact." I slid the Aeroline contract across the low table. He signed a contract with his college roommate that guarantees payment for failure. He is draining cash to create operational crises so he can blame me. That is not modernization. Roderick, that is embezzlement. Roderick picked up the paper. He glanced at it, then set it back down. "You think small, Gabriella," he said. "That is your problem. You see a few $1,000s in vendor leakage and you call it crime. I see the cost of doing business. Mason is building relationships. Sometimes that costs money. He is sabotaging the company." I kept my voice low, but the intensity vibrated in the air. He delayed the Ford shipment on purpose. Roderick leaned forward. His eyes went cold. "Does it matter?" he asked. I stared at him. "Excuse me? Does it matter if he is incompetent? Does it matter if he is corrupt? Halden Rowe is buying the firm for $200 million. That is the only number I care about. Once the check clears, Mason can burn the place to the ground for all I care. And you will be a very rich woman. Why are you fighting this? Because it is my father's name on the building," I said, "and because you have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders, not just your own wallet." He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "Duty. Your father understood duty. He understood that sometimes you have to make the hard call to protect the wealth. My father warned me about you." I said. Roderick's smile vanished. "Your father was a frightened man at the end. He knew he didn't have the stomach for what was coming. That is why he built the trust. That is why he gave me the trigger, because he knew that when the time came, you would be too sentimental to pull the trigger yourself." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Tuesday night, Gabriella, we vote, we sell. And if you try to embarrass your brother at that reception, I will trigger the proxy and fire you for cause before the canapés are served. Do not test me." He walked away, leaving the contract on the table. He didn't care about the fraud. He knew. He probably encouraged it. It was all part of the theater to devalue the company just enough to justify the sale, while keeping the purchase price high enough to cash out. I realized then that I couldn't appeal to his morality. He didn't have any. I drove to my mother's house. It was the only stone left unturned. Elaine was in the library, staring at a photo of my father. She looked smaller than she had a week ago. The denial was eating her alive. "Mother," I said from the doorway, "Roderick knows." She turned, her hand fluttering to her throat. "Knows what?" "He knows Mason is a fraud. He doesn't care. He just wants the sale commission. Stop it, Gabriella." I walked into the room. I sat down on the ottoman in front of her chair. I took her hands. They were trembling. "Mom, look at me. Dad didn't trust Roderick. He left me a note. He said, 'Never let Mason sign a loan.'" "I told you," Elaine started, pulling away. "Why?" I interrupted. "Why did he write that? And why did you sign the trust documents?" She looked away, tears welling in her eyes. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. He was dying. "Gabby," she whispered finally. "The cancer. It was in his brain. He was paranoid. He was scared. He thought everyone was trying to take the company. And Roderick? Roderick came to me after the funeral. She said, I was a mess. I didn't know how to read the balance sheets. I was afraid we would lose everything. Roderick said he could protect us. He said the trust would keep the vultures away. Did he explain the springing proxy? I asked. Did he tell you that he could take your vote away if he decided there was instability? She shook her head. He said it was a formality. He said it was just in case I got sick, in case I couldn't make decisions. He said he would be the guardian. He lied to you. Mom, he tricked you into signing away your power so he could sell the company whenever he wanted, and now he is using Mason to do it. Elaine began to weep, a quiet, broken sound. Mason just wants to make his father proud. He tries so hard. Mason is going to destroy Dad's legacy. I said, and he is going to leave you with nothing but money and guilt. I can't vote against him, she sobbed. I can't be the one to tell him he isn't good enough. It would break his heart. You don't have to tell him, I said gently. You just have to trust me. I stood up. I didn't have her vote. She was too paralyzed by maternal guilt to side with me against her son. But I had the truth. My father hadn't trusted Roderick. My mother had been manipulated. The moral authority of the board was a sham. I had one card left to play. I called Lionel. Execute the commitment letter. I said, Are you sure? Lionel asked. We are still short on votes. If you sign this, and we lose on Tuesday, you are on the hook for the breakup fee. It will bankrupt you personally. I know. I said, Draw it up. I met the partners from Larkhaven and Sarah Lynn from Harborstone in a small, windowless conference room at the law firm. The table was covered in documents. The air smelled of stale coffee and high stakes. Sarah Lynn looked at me. You look like you went 12 rounds, Ms. Reed. I feel like it, I said, but I'm still standing. We have structured the debt, Sarah said, but the covenant is tight if the vote fails, or if Roderick triggers the proxy and ties this up in court for months, the financing pulls back. You have a 48-hour window to close control. I understand. Sterling, the Larkhaven partner, slid the purchase agreement toward me. We are putting up $40 million in equity. You are putting up everything you own. We need to know you can pull the trigger. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. I thought about the shipping dock in the cold morning air. I thought about Mrs. Gable. I thought about the copper wire and the lies. I signed my name, Gabriella Reed. I am now the managing member of Reed Harbor Holdings. I said, Now go take your company back. Sterling said. I returned to the office at 6 p.m. The sun had set. The building was dark, except for the cleaning crew. I went to log into my computer to finalize the shareholder list. Access denied. I tried again. Account suspended. Contact administrator. I pulled out my phone to check my email. Password incorrect. I walked to the door. My badge didn't beep. The red light stayed solid. Mason had made his move. He had locked me out. He was trying to blind me 24 hours before the reception. He wanted me to walk into that ballroom helpless, without data, without access, unable to speak. I stood in the dark hallway and smiled. I pulled a small, encrypted hard drive from my purse. I had downloaded the entire server backup 3 days ago. I had the vendor contracts. I had the invoice logs. I had the aeroline amendment. I had the emails. He thought he was locking me out of the building, but the building was just brick and mortar. The company was the truth, and I carried the truth in my pocket. I walked to the elevator, pressing the down button. He wanted a leadership transition toast? I was going to give him one he would never forget. The grand ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a cavern of gold leaf and crystal, smelling of expensive perfume and the distinct, metallic scent of victory. It was 7 o'clock on a Wednesday. Outside, the Chicago wind was howling off the lake, stripping the last leaves from the trees. Inside, the air was still and warm, conditioned to a perfect 72 degrees for the comfort of the men who were about to dismantle my father's legacy. I stood at the back of the room, in the shadow of a massive velvet drape. I wore a navy blue dress, high-necked and long-sleeved, the kind of dress you wear to a board meeting, not a party. Next to me stood Lionel Hart, looking like a vulture who had just spotted a carcass, and a man named Arthur Pence. Arthur was the senior trustee representative from Crestwell Fiduciary Services. He was a small man with glasses thick enough to see into the future, and he held a leather portfolio against his chest like a shield. I had spent 3 hours that morning convincing him to attend. I had shown him the aeroline contract. I had shown him the fake inventory report. I had told him that if he did not witness what was about to happen, his firm would be named as a co-conspirator in the inevitable shareholder lawsuit. He did not want to be there, but he was there. I watched the room. It was a sea of black tuxedos and cocktail dresses. There were 300 people here, the entire executive staff of North Star Components, the board of directors, the bankers from Chase and Citi, and moving through them like sharks in a reef were the representatives from Halden Row Capital. They were easy to spot. They were younger, tan, and smiled with too many teeth. They were shaking hands with my plant managers, clapping my engineers on the back, likely asking them questions about headcount and efficiency, while mentally calculating their severance packages. And there was Mason. My brother stood on a raised platform near the bar, holding a tumbler of scotch. He was glowing. I had never seen him look so alive. He was laughing at something Roderick Vale was saying, his head thrown back, his hand resting casually on the shoulder of the Halden Row managing director. He looked like a king. "Look at them," Lionel whispered, leaning close to my ear. "They are already spending the commission checks. Let them enjoy the drink." I said, "It is the last one they are going to get on the company tab." The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room as the jazz trio in the corner stopped playing. A spotlight hit the stage, and Roderick Vale stepped up to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone," Roderick said. His voice was smooth, practiced. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "We are here tonight to celebrate more than just another profitable quarter. We are here to celebrate evolution." Applause rippled through the room. For 40 years, North Star has been a pillar of American manufacturing. Roderick continued, "But the world changes, markets shift, and to survive, we must shift with them. We need new energy, new vision, and tonight, I am proud to announce the next step in that journey." He gestured to Mason. "Please welcome the new managing partner of North Star Components, Mason Reed." The applause was thunderous. I watched my mother, Elaine, sitting at a table near the front. She was clapping so hard her hands must have stung. She was beaming, tears glistening in her eyes. She saw her son ascending to the throne. She did not see the strings Roderick was pulling. Mason bounded onto the stage. He hugged Roderick. He shook hands with the Halden Row execs. He took the microphone, and for a moment, he just looked out at the crowd, soaking it in. "Wow," Mason said. "Just wow," he chuckled. A self-deprecating sound that the room ate up. "You know, my father built this company with a wrench in one hand and a dream in the other." Mason said, "He was a builder, and my sister, Gabriella." He paused, looking around the room until he found me in the shadows. He pointed. A spotlight swung toward me, blinding me for a second. "There she is," Mason said. "Give it up for Gabby. Everyone, the hardest working woman in logistics." The room clapped politely. I did not smile. I did not wave. I stood perfectly still. "Gabriella has been the rock of our operations," Mason continued. "And as we move into this exciting new partnership with Halden Row, I am thrilled to say that she will continue to support the legacy. While I focus on the strategic vision and the global expansion, Gabriella has agreed to stay on and keep our internal operations running smooth. She is going to make sure the trains run on time while we build the tracks to the future." It was a masterclass in dismissal. He was patting me on the head. He was telling the world that I was the help, and he was the architect. He was publicly erasing my 14 years of leadership and reducing me to a mid-level manager whose only job was to serve his vision. The spotlight swung back to him. "So please, raise your glasses," Mason said, lifting his scotch. "To the future, to North Star, and to the new era. To the new era!" The room chorused. Mason brought the glass to his lips. I walked out of the shadows. I did not run. I did not shout. I walked with the steady, rhythmic pace of a woman who has walked a factory floor every day for a decade. I walked up the center aisle, my heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Lionel and Arthur Pence followed me, flanking me like guards. The room went quiet. The toast hung in the air. Unfinished. Mason lowered his glass. He frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. "Gabby?" he said into the microphone. "We are in the middle of a toast." I walked up the stairs to the stage. I stood next to him. I was shorter than him, but in that moment, I felt 10 feet tall. "May I?" I asked, reaching for the microphone. He hesitated. He looked at Roderick. Roderick gave a tiny, imperceptible nod, a look that said, "Let her say her piece and embarrass herself. Then we will escort her out." Mason handed me the mic. "You want to add a few words?" "That is sweet. Sis." I turned to the room. The blinding light was hot on my face. I saw the faces of the employees I had hired. I saw Frank Miller, the plant manager, looking anxious. I saw Sarah Lynn from the bank, standing in the back with her arms crossed. I did not smile. "The toast is premature," I said. My voice was calm. It did not shake. A murmur went through the crowd. Mason laughed nervously. "Okay, Gabby, let us not get emotional." "I am not emotional." "Mason," I said, "I am factual, and the fact is, you are not the new partner, and there will be no sale to Halden Row." Roderick Vale stepped forward, his face darkening. "Gabriella, this is neither the time nor the place for family drama. Step down. It is not family drama. Roderick," I said, turning to face him, "it is corporate governance." I reached into the folder Lionel was holding and pulled out a document. It was a single page, stamped with the seal of the state of Delaware. "As of 4 o'clock this afternoon," I said, holding the paper up. "A new entity, Reed Harbor Holdings, has acquired a controlling interest in North Star Components Group. We have executed purchase agreements for 51% of the outstanding voting shares." The room froze. It was the kind of silence that feels like a vacuum, sucking the air out of the lungs. Roderick laughed. It was a loud, forced sound. "That is impossible. The Vale Trust holds 20%. Your mother holds 30. You have 10. Do the math. Gabriella, you are making a scene." I looked at the crowd. I purchased the 10% block held by the minority coalition. I said, "I purchased the 2% held by the estate of Mrs. Gable. I purchased the 3% held by the Henderson family. I looked at Roderick, and I purchased the 5% block held by Dr. Simon Kell." Roderick's face went slack. "Kell?" he whispered. "Kell is loyal to the board. Doctor, Kell is loyal to competence." I said, I pulled out the consent form signed by Simon Kell. I handed it to the bewildered board secretary who was standing near the stage. "This is a certified proxy." I said, "Doctor, Kell has assigned his voting rights to Reed Harbor Holdings effective immediately." Mason stepped toward me. "You are lying. You don't have the money. Simon wouldn't sell to you. You are broke. Gabby." I turned to the back of the room. Sarah Lynn raised her hand. "We have provided the debt facility," she called out, her voice cutting through the tension. "Harborstone Bank has fully underwritten the acquisition. The funds are in escrow, and the equity is provided by Lark Haven Industrial Partners." I added, "We are fully capitalized." The murmur in the room turned into a roar. Executives were whispering frantically. The Halden Row representatives were checking their phones, looking suddenly very uncomfortable. Roderick Vale grabbed the microphone stand, leaning in close to me. His shark smile was gone. He looked dangerous. "This is a hostile action," he hissed, loud enough for the front row to hear. "You have triggered the instability clause. I am the trustee of the Vale Trust. I am declaring a state of emergency management. I am seizing your mother's voting rights to block this transfer." He looked at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he shouted, "please remain calm. This is an unauthorized disruption. As chairman, I am exercising the emergency powers granted by the shareholder agreement to—" Arthur Pence stepped up to the microphone. He was small. but he had the voice of a man who spent his life reading statutes. "Mr. Vale," Arthur said. Roderick blinked. "Who are you?" "I am Arthur Pence, Senior Counsel for Crestwell Fiduciary Services. We administer the Vale Voting Trust." Roderick went pale. "I have reviewed the trust indenture this afternoon," Arthur said. He adjusted his glasses. "The springing proxy clause you are referring to allows the trustee to assume voting control only in the event of genuine management instability or external threat." "This is an external threat," Roderick shouted, pointing at me. "She is raiding the company. Ms. Reed is a current shareholder and director." Arthur said calmly, "Buying shares is not a threat. However, the trust has a more specific clause. Section 4, Paragraph 2. The trustee may not exercise emergency powers if the trustee is under investigation for breach of fiduciary duty." Roderick froze. "What?" I took the microphone back. "Thank you, Arthur." I turned to Mason. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly open, the Scotch glass trembling in his hand. "We are not just buying the company." "Mason," I said, "we are cleaning it." I pulled the second stack of documents from Lionel's folder. "I have here the forensic logs from the company's internal server." I held up a screenshot. "This shows the authorization of $150,000 in payments to a shell company called Juniper Ridge Advisory." I threw the paper on the floor of the stage. "I have here the invoice log for Apex Horizon Solutions, billing $25,000 a month for leadership coaching." I threw that paper down too. "And I have here the amendment to the Aeroline dispatch contract." I said. My voice dropped an octave. It became hard, cold. "This contract guarantees payments to a trucking firm owned by your college roommate, Trent Callahan, regardless of performance. It included a kickback structure that paid you to delay our own shipments." The room gasped. This wasn't just corporate maneuvering. This was theft. "You delayed the Ford shipment," I said, looking directly into Mason's eyes. "You risked the biggest account we have. You risked the jobs of everyone in this room. You risked the pension fund, all to create a crisis you could blame on me." Mason's face turned a violent shade of red. He lunged for the mic. "She is lying," he screamed. The sound tore through the speakers, making everyone wince. "She is crazy. She is jealous because Dad loved me more. She is making this up." I did not flinch. I let him scream. I let everyone see him. I let them see the sweat on his forehead, the panic in his eyes, the total lack of control. "You forged my digital signature, Mason," I said quietly. "But you forgot that the server logs the machine ID. You signed the Aeroline contract from your desk. It is all here." Meredith Klein pushed her way to the front of the stage. She looked terrified. "Stop this," she shouted. "This is privileged information. You cannot disclose internal legal documents in a public forum. This is a violation of your employment contract." Arthur Pence leaned into the mic again. "Actually, Ms. Klein," Arthur said, "under the corporate bylaws, a director has the right to disclose evidence of criminal malfeasance to the shareholders, and since Ms. Reed now controls the majority of the shares, she is essentially reporting to herself." Meredith stopped. She looked at Roderick. Roderick was not looking at her. He was looking at his phone, likely typing a message to his personal lawyer. He knew the ship had hit the iceberg. He was looking for a lifeboat. Mason grabbed my arm. His grip was painful. "You bitch," he hissed. "You ungrateful, jealous bitch." I was saving this company. I was the partner. I looked down at his hand on my arm. Then I looked up at his face. "Security," I said into the microphone. Two large men in black suits, who I had hired privately that afternoon, stepped out from the wings. They were not hotel security. They were private contractors. "Mason Reed," I said. My voice rang out clear and final. "As the majority shareholder and acting chair of the board, I am terminating your employment with North Star Components for cause." "For cause?" Mason laughed. A hysterical, high-pitched sound. "You can't fire me. I am the vice president. Effective immediately." I continued. "You are relieved of all duties. You are barred from the premises. and you will surrender your company phone and laptop now." The security guards stepped onto the stage. One of them gently but firmly removed Mason's hand from my arm. The other reached for his phone. "Don't touch me!" Mason shouted. He shoved the guard. The guard did not move. He simply took Mason's arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him to bend over. The Scotch glass fell from his hand and shattered on the stage. The sound of breaking glass was the only noise in the room. "Roderick!" Mason yelled. "Roderick, do something!" Roderick Vale turned his back. He walked over to the Halden Row representatives and began speaking in a low, urgent tone. He was cutting his losses. The guards marched Mason toward the exit. He was still shouting, listing his grievances, calling me names, threatening lawsuits. But as they dragged him through the ballroom, the crowd parted. The executives who had been laughing at his jokes 10 minutes ago stepped back, averting their eyes. No one wanted to be near the fallout. I watched him go. I watched my brother, the golden boy, being hauled out of the Drake Hotel like a drunk at a bar fight. I felt a profound, crushing sadness, but I did not show it. I turned back to the room. My mother was sitting at her table, her face buried in her hands. She was weeping. She wasn't weeping for the company. She was weeping because her illusion had been shattered. I took a deep breath. I apologized for the disruption. I said to the room, "The bar remains open. Please, enjoy the evening. Tomorrow, we go back to work." I placed the microphone back on the stand. I walked down the stairs. The crowd parted for me now, but not out of dismissal. They parted out of fear, out of respect. They looked at me as if they had never seen me before. Lionel was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. He handed me a glass of water. "That was brutal," he said softly. "It was necessary." I said. Sarah Lynn walked up. She looked impressed. "The wire transfer cleared." She said, "You own it." Gabriella. "Thank you." Sarah. "I need to sit down." I said. I walked past the staring faces, past the whispering board members, past Meredith Klein, who was frantically packing her purse. I walked out of the double doors and into the quiet of the hallway. The carpet was thick and patterned. The walls were lined with sconces that cast a soft, yellow light. It was silent here. The roar of the ballroom was muffled behind the heavy oak doors. I leaned against the wall. My legs suddenly felt like water. The adrenaline that had held me upright for the last hour evaporated, leaving me trembling. I looked at my hands. They were shaking. I had done it. I had bought the company. I had fired my brother. I had humiliated the chairman. But as I stood there, trying to catch my breath, I saw the elevator doors open at the end of the hall. Roderick Vale walked out. He wasn't leaving. He was coming toward me. He didn't look defeated. He didn't look angry. He looked calm. He stopped 5 feet away from me. He adjusted his silk tie. Very theatrical. "Gabriella," he said, "your father would have appreciated the drama. I own 51%. Roderick," I said, my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. "You are done." He smiled. It was a cold, thin smile. "You own 51% of the shares. Yes, but you seem to have forgotten something." "What?" "The debt covenants on the North Star bonds." He said, "The bonds your father issued 10 years ago. I know the bonds." I said, "They are stable. They have a change of control provision." Roderick said softly, "If the family ownership structure changes without the unanimous consent of the board, the bonds become callable immediately." My stomach dropped. "I am the chairman of the board." "Gabriella," he said, "and I do not consent." He stepped closer, his cologne smelling of sandalwood and malice. "You have the equity, but by tomorrow morning, the bondholders will demand full repayment of $40 million. You don't have $40 million. Reed Harbor Holdings is tapped out." He leaned in. "You bought the captain's chair on the Titanic, my dear. And I just steered you into the iceberg." He patted my shoulder, a mockery of comfort. "Sleep well, Gabriella. I will see you in court." He walked past me, heading for the exit. I stood alone in the hallway. The victory turned to ash in my mouth. I had won the battle. But he had just told me that he had rigged the war years ago. I was trembling, but not from adrenaline anymore. I was trembling because I realized that firing Mason was the easy part. The real fight had just begun. The hallway outside the ballroom was silent, but my mind was screaming. Roderick Vale's threat about the bonds hung in the air like toxic smoke. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to lean against the silk wallpaper and let the exhaustion finally take me. But I checked my watch. It was 8:15 in the evening. The third shift at the Lake Briar plant started at 9. If Roderick was going to burn the house down, I had to make sure the people inside knew where the exits were. I drove straight to the plant. I did not change out of my navy gala dress. I walked onto the factory floor in heels, the smell of coolant and grinding metal replacing the perfume of the Drake Hotel. The rumor mill had beaten me there. The workers were huddled in small groups near the CNC machines, whispering. When they saw me, they went quiet. They looked at the dress, then at my face. They looked scared. Gather everyone. I told the shift supervisor. 10 minutes. Break room. I stood on a plastic chair in the cafeteria, surrounded by 50 men and women in safety goggles and steel-toed boots. They looked tired. They looked like people who had mortgages and kids, and who had just heard their company was being sold for parts. There are stories going around. I said, my voice projecting over the hum of the vending machines. I am here to tell you the truth. Tonight, I purchased the controlling interest in North Star. Mason Reed has been terminated. A ripple of shock went through the room. I know what you're afraid of. I continued. You are afraid of the private equity firm. You are afraid of layoffs. You are afraid that the pension fund is going to disappear. I looked at Frank Miller, who was standing in the back. I'm not going to lie to you. The next few weeks will be a fight. There are people in high towers who want to see us fail so they can sell the pieces. But I'm telling you this. As long as I hold the pen, there will be no surprise layoffs. The pension is fully funded and locked, and starting tomorrow, we are restoring the safety training budget that was cut. I paused. I cannot promise you that the waters will be smooth, but I can promise you that we are all in the same boat, and I am not getting off. There was silence. Then, slowly, a man in the front row, a welder named Alvarez, nodded. That is good enough for me. Ms. Reed, he said. It was a small victory. But as I drove back to the city at 3 a.m, the adrenaline faded, and the cold reality of Roderick's leverage settled in. I slept for 2 hours on the couch in my office. I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. It was Sarah Lynn from Harborstone Bank. Gabriella, she said. Her voice was tight. We have a problem. The bonds? I asked, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. No, worse. A challenge has been filed in the Delaware Chancery Court this morning. The plaintiff is the Vale Voting Trust. They are seeking an emergency injunction to reverse the share transfer. On what grounds? I asked. I have the signed consents. They are citing the stability clause. Sarah said. They are arguing that your termination of a senior executive, Mason, without a full board vote constitutes reckless destabilization of the management team. They are claiming that under the trust indenture, this automatically triggers a suspension of all voting rights held by the family, pending a review. It is a circular argument, I said. Standing up, they create the instability, then blame me for fixing it. It doesn't matter if it is circular. Gabriella, it matters that it is filed. My credit committee is spooked. If the court grants the injunction, your control is frozen. And if your control is frozen, our financing is technically void. You have 24 hours to show cause, or we have to pull the funding. I hung up. The walls of my office felt like they were closing in. I called Lionel. Get to the office. Now. We spent the morning digging through the archives. Lionel, Priya, and I turned my father's office upside down. We were looking for the original signed addendum to the trust, the document my mother said she signed while grieving. We found everything but that. Then, at noon, Lionel found something else. He was holding a dusty binder labeled Estate Planning 2018. Gabriella, he said, look at this. He pointed to a clause in a draft summary, the springing proxy. I read it. In the event of a deadlock or dispute regarding the definition of stability, The voting power of the trust shall not revert to the family, nor remain with the trustee, but shall be temporarily assigned to a designated third-party arbiter to ensure neutrality. A third party? I asked. Who? I turned the page. The field for the name was blank in the draft. If this clause exists in the final version, Lionel said, then Roderick doesn't even need to win the court case. He just needs to trigger the dispute. Once the dispute is active, the votes go to this mysterious third party. And let me guess, I said bitterly, the third party is someone Roderick controls. Priya walked in. She was holding a stack of ledgers. She looked pale. I think I found the third party, she said, or at least, who is paying them? She slammed the ledger onto the desk. I was tracing the wire transfers for the last 5 years. Priya said, looking for the consulting fees. I found a reserve account. It is labeled Legal Contingency Fund, but it is not a company account. It is funded by North Star, but the signatory is Crestwell Fiduciary. How much is in it? Lionel asked. $5 million. Priya said, and look at the disbursement code. It matches an internal code used for a vendor called Ironclad Holdings. Ironclad Holdings, Lionel repeated. He pulled out his laptop and started typing furiously. It is a shell, Lionel said after a minute, but look at the registered agent. It is the same agent used by Roderick Vale's personal family office. I sat back. It was a perfect trap. My father had set aside money to protect the company, but Roderick had diverted it into a war chest to fight us. He was using our own money to pay a neutral third party that he effectively owned. He rigged the game before I even knew I was playing. I whispered. My phone buzzed. It was a news alert. North Star chaos. Heir ousted in hostile family coup. I opened the link. It was a hit piece in a major business journal. The source was Anonymous Insiders. Mason Reed, the visionary architect of North Star's modernization plan, was physically removed from the company headquarters last night in what sources are calling a vindictive power grab by his sister, Gabriella Reed. Analysts fear this erratic leadership change will jeopardize the company's solvency. He is winning the air war, Lionel said, reading over my shoulder. He is painting you as the hysterical sister destroying value. This will spook the customers. I need to talk to him. I said, do not do that. Lionel warned, he will record you. I don't care. I need to look him in the eye. I called Roderick's office. His secretary put me through immediately. He was expecting the call. Come to the office, Gabriella, he said smoothly. Let us discuss the terms of your surrender. I walked into the boardroom at 2:00. Roderick was sitting at the head of the table, alone. The room was vast and empty, the view of the Chicago skyline gray and imposing behind him. He looked comfortable. He looked like a man who had already won. Sit down, he said. I remained standing. Who is the third party? Roderick? He smiled. Does it matter? It matters because you are defrauding the shareholders. I said, you are using company funds to pay for a proxy that ensures you never lose control. That is not stewardship. That is theft. It is protection. He corrected. Your father knew he was leaving the company to a soft-hearted operator and a vanity-seeking playboy. He knew the family would destroy the business. I am simply the guardrail. You are the parasite. I said. He stood up, walking slowly toward the window. You have a choice. Gabriella, the court hearing is tomorrow. I will drag this out. I will file motions. I will demand discovery. I will challenge every signature on those consent forms. And while you do that, I said, the banks will pull the credit lines. Exactly, he said, turning to face me. The customers will see the headlines. Ford will cancel the contracts. The suppliers will demand cash on delivery. By the time you win, if you win, the company will be a smoking crater. He leaned against the glass. Or, he said softly, you resign. You reinstate Mason as a figurehead. We complete the sale to Halden Rowe. You walk away with $20 million and your reputation intact. We tell the world that you decided to pursue philanthropic interests. And the employees? I asked. The pension fund? Collateral damage. He said with a shrug, "That is capitalism, Gabriella." I looked at him. I looked at the man my father had trusted. I saw the absolute, hollow emptiness of him. He didn't care about the company. He didn't care about the legacy. He only cared about being the smartest man in the room. "No," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "No, I am not resigning, and I am not selling." "Then you are destroying your family," he said coldly. "Mason will never forgive you. Your mother will never forgive you. And when the bankruptcy court auctions off the assets, it will be your name on the docket." I walked out. I went back to the war room. Lionel and Priya were waiting. "He is not bluffing." I said, "He will burn it down to rule the ashes. Then we have to go nuclear." Lionel said, "What does that mean?" "It means we invite the vampires in." Lionel said, "We go to the state attorney general. We self-report the fraud. We report the credential misuse, the kickbacks, the reserve account. We ask for a state-appointed monitor to oversee the company during the investigation. That is suicide." Priya said, "A criminal investigation? The stock value will tank. It will tank." Lionel agreed, "But it freezes Roderick. He can't exercise the proxy if he is under criminal indictment for fraud. It stops the sale. It stops the bond recall. It buys us time. It destroys the company's reputation." I said, "Who buys parts from a company under FBI investigation? It is the only way to kill the proxy." Lionel said. I sat down, head in my hands. It was a choice between a slow death by suffocation or a sudden death by gunshot. The door opened. My mother walked in. She looked 10 years older than she had at the gala. Her eyes were swollen. She was holding a handkerchief. "Elaine?" I said, standing up. "I heard," she whispered. "I heard what he is doing." She walked over to the desk. She looked at the papers, the diagrams of the fraud, the evidence of Mason's betrayal. She picked up the invoice for the leadership coaching. "He promised me," she said, her voice shaking. "Roderick promised me he would take care of us. He is taking care of himself. Mom." Elaine looked at me. Her eyes were clear for the first time in years. "I can stop him," she said. "How?" "I can testify," she said. "I can go to the judge tomorrow. I can tell them that I was coerced, that I was grieving and medicated when I signed the trust documents, that Roderick misled me about the nature of the stability clause." "Mom," I said gently, "if you do that, it will be public. They will ask you about your mental state. They will ask you about the medication. The papers will tear you apart. I don't care," she said. She reached out and touched my face. "I let your father down. I let you down. I hid in my garden while you carried the weight of the world." She took a deep breath. "Let me do this, Gabriella. Let me be the mother I should have been." I looked at her. I saw the resolve in her face, but I also saw the fragility. If I let her do this, I would win the legal battle, but I would destroy her privacy and dignity. I would drag the last pure thing, my mother's reputation, through the mud of a corporate lawsuit. I could not do it. I could not be like Roderick. I could not use people as ammunition. "No, Mom," I said. "Gabriella." "No," I repeated firmly. "I am not going to let them put you on the stand. We are not going to win by destroying this family further." "Then how?" Lionel asked. "How do we win?" "We don't win in court," I said. "We win in the daylight." I stood up, set up a camera. I said to Priya, "What?" "We are going to stream a town hall, to everyone, the employees, the shareholders, the customers, the press. Now, 30 minutes later, I stood in the atrium of the headquarters. A single camera was pointed at me. The feed was live. I didn't use a teleprompter. I didn't wear a blazer. I stood there in my navy dress, with dark circles under my eyes, and I looked into the lens. "My name is Gabriella Reed," I began, "and I am the owner of North Star Components." I took a breath. For the last 48 hours, there have been stories about this company, stories about chaos, stories about instability. I am here to tell you the truth. North Star is not for sale. We are not merging. We are not liquidating. I looked directly at the camera, imagining Roderick watching in his tower. There are forces that believe a company is just a collection of assets to be stripped. They believe that legacy is a liability and that loyalty is a weakness. They have tried to force a sale of this company through manipulation, fear, and fraud. I paused. I have discovered evidence of financial misconduct at the highest levels of our former governance. Contracts were falsified. Safety budgets were cut to manufacture artificial profits. Vendor payments were routed to shell companies. I held up the airline contract. I am releasing all of this documentation to the public domain tonight. Transparency is the only disinfectant strong enough to save us. I lowered the paper. I know this will cause fear. I know our stock price might drop tomorrow, but I would rather run a clean company at half the value than a corrupt one at double. So, here is my promise. Effective immediately, I am appointing an independent third-party auditor to review every transaction of the last 5 years. I am establishing a temporary governance committee that includes representation from our workforce. And I am inviting the State Attorney General to review our books. I leaned in. To our customers, your parts will ship. To our employees, your jobs are safe. And to those who think they can steal this company from the people who built it. My voice hardened. The locks have been changed. I signaled to cut the feed. The silence in the atrium was absolute. Lionel looked at me with a mixture of horror and awe. You just invited the regulator, he said. You just blew up the bridge. I know, I said. But now Roderick is trapped on the other side. The aftermath was immediate and violent. The stock price didn't just drop. It plummeted. The phone lines lit up with panicked suppliers. But then, something else happened. An email came in from the union representative at the Lake Briar plant. We saw the stream. The boys are willing to take a temporary wage freeze if it helps keep the lights on. We are with you. Then a call from our biggest customer at Ford. We saw the broadcast. We don't like the drama. Gabriella. But we like the honesty. If you can guarantee delivery, we are not canceling. For a moment, I thought I had done it. I thought I had stabilized the ship. Then, at 6 o'clock, a courier arrived. He handed me a thick envelope. It wasn't from the court. It wasn't from Roderick. It was from the trustee of the bonds. I opened it. My hands were steady, but my heart was hammering. Notice of default. The header read, Dear Ms. Reed, pursuant to the public admission of internal fraud and the initiation of state regulatory oversight, the risk rating of North Star Components has been downgraded to junk status. Under the covenants of the 2014 bond issue, this downgrade constitutes a material adverse event. I read the final line, the line that stopped my heart. We hereby demand immediate repayment of the principal amount of $42 million within 3 business days. Failure to remit payment will result in the immediate seizure of all collateral assets, including the Lake Briar and Chicago facilities. I dropped the letter on the desk. Roderick hadn't triggered the proxy. He hadn't needed to. He had let me trigger the bond recall myself, by going public, by admitting the fraud to stop him. I had handed the bondholders the gun and asked them to shoot. I had saved my name. I had exposed the truth. But I had $42 million due in 72 hours, and I had used every cent of liquidity to buy the shares. My phone rang. It was Roderick. I picked it up. Hello? Gabriella, he said. He sounded cheerful. I saw your broadcast. Very moving. Go to hell. Roderick. I just received a call from the bondholders. He said, They are quite upset. It seems you have a liquidity crisis. What do you want? I have a solution. He said, Halden Rowe is still interested. They are willing to pay off the bonds. They will take the company, pay the debt, and you can walk away. The offer stands until midnight. And if I refuse, then the bondholders foreclose on Friday. The plants close. The workers go home. And you are the woman who bought the company just to drive it off a cliff. He paused. You have 3 hours. Gabriella, save the people, or save your pride. You can't do both. The line went dead. I stood in the office as the sun went down over Chicago. The city lights flickered on, indifferent to my ruin. I looked at the picture of my father on the wall. I looked at the letter demanding $42 million. I had the truth. I had the control. I had the loyalty of my people. But I did not have the money. I walked to the window. I looked at the reflection of my own face in the glass. I looked tired, but I did not look defeated. There was one option left. One option I hadn't considered because it was too dangerous, too personal, and involved a man I had sworn never to speak to again. A shadow investor from my father's past who hated Roderick Vale more than I did. I pulled a small, tattered business card from the hidden lining of my father's wallet. The one thing I had kept for myself. It had no name, just a number and a symbol of a black rook. I picked up the phone. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, then a voice, deep and gravelly, answered. "North Star?" "Yes," I said. "This is Gabriella Reed. I am calling to cash in the favor." There was a silence on the other end, a silence that felt like an intake of breath before a plunge. "You know the price," the voice said. "I know." I said, "Then open the door." The voice said, "I am already in the lobby." I hung up the phone. I stared at the door of my office. The handle began to turn. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Gabriella Reed and her fight for North Star. Writing a revenge story is always a dance between justice and the price we pay for it. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below with your city or country. If you want to see how Gabriella handles the bondholders and who walk through that door, make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories so you don't miss the next chapter. And please, share your thoughts in English in the comments. Do you think she made the right choice exposing the fraud? Or did she walk into Roderick's final trap? I look forward to reading your theories. Until next time.